The winter storm had been raging for 3 days when she appeared at Marcus Blackwood's door, where through the howling wind and driving snow, he could barely make out the figure hunched against his porch, post small, trembling, wrapped in a tattered blanket that provided little protection against the Montana blizzard. Marcus set down his evening coffee and moved to the window, his weathered hands gripping the sill as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. In 20 years of running the Diamond B Ranch, he'd never had anyone brave weather like this to reach his isolated homestead. Most folks had sense enough to wait out winter storms in town, but there was something familiar about the way the figure moved. Something that made his heart skip in recognition even before he could see her face clearly. When he opened the heavy oak door, the wind nearly knocked him backward, but it was the sight of the woman before him that truly stole his breath. "Ayanna," he whispered. She looked up at him with dark eyes that had haunted his dreams for 5 years, her beautiful face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion, her lips blue with cold. Snow clung to her long black hair, and the blanket around her shoulders was soaked through. Marcus. His name fell from her lips like a prayer. "Please, take me in. You can use me however you want. I need shelter. I need help." The desperation in her voice cut through him like a blade. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped her into his arms, carrying her inside away from the storm's fury. She was so light, so fragile compared to the strong, proud woman he remembered. "What happened to you?" he asked, settling her into the chair closest to the massive stone fireplace. "Where have you been?" But Ayanna was shivering too violently to speak coherently. Marcus quickly built up the fire, then disappeared into his bedroom to return with warm, dry clothes and thick wool blankets. "Get out of those wet things," he said gently, turning his back to give her privacy. "There's hot coffee on the stove, and I'll make you something to eat." As he busied himself in the kitchen, Marcus's mind raced with questions and memories. 5 years ago, Ayanna had been the daughter of Chief Running Bear, a proud member of the Crow Nation who had worked alongside Marcus to keep peace between their peoples. She had also been the woman he loved, beautiful, intelligent, fierce in her loyalty to both her tribe and to him. Their love had been forbidden by both worlds. Her father had promised her to a warrior from another tribe to cement political alliances, while Marcus's business partners threatened to withdraw their support if he continued his relationship with an Indian woman. The pressure from all sides had torn them apart. Ayanna had left with her promised husband to live on the reservation 200 miles south. Marcus had never stopped loving her. He'd never even tried. Marcus. Her voice was stronger now, warmed by the fire and dry clothes. When he turned around, she was wearing his old flannel shirt and work pants, both far too large for her slight frame. But even dressed in his cast-offs, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Tell me what happened," he said, settling into the chair across from her with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Ayanna wrapped her hands around the warm cup, her dark eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. "Joseph died last winter. Tuberculosis took him, along with half the reservation." Joseph, her husband, the man she'd left Marcus for. Marcus felt a complicated mixture of grief for her loss and shameful relief that the barrier between them was gone. "The Indian agents cut our food rations again," she continued, her voice steady but hollow. "They said the government couldn't afford to support lazy Indians who wouldn't work white man's jobs. But there were no jobs, Marcus. No land to farm, no cattle to tend. Just bare ground and empty promises." "How did you survive?" "I did not really. After Joseph died, his family cast me out, said I brought bad luck, that I was cursed. I've been wandering for months, working when I could find it, begging when I couldn't." She looked up at him then, and he saw the proud woman he'd known struggling beneath layers of hardship and desperation. "I thought about coming to you so many times, but I was ashamed of what I'd become, what I'd let them make me." Marcus set down his coffee and moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands covering hers. "There's nothing shameful about surviving, Ayanna. There's nothing shameful about needing help, isn't there?" Her laugh was bitter. 5 years ago, I was Chief Running Bear's daughter. spoke 3 languages, could ride better than most men commanded. Respect from tribal councils and white settlers alike. Now look at me, a half-starved widow, begging at your door, offering to sell herself for shelter. You didn't offer to sell yourself, Marcus said firmly. You asked for help from someone who loves you. There's a difference. The words hung between them, unplanned but undeniable. Ayana's eyes widened, and Marcus saw hope flicker there like candlelight in darkness. You still? I never stopped. Not for a single day in 5 years. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, the first break in the composed facade she'd maintained. Since arriving, Marcus pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him like a woman who'd been holding herself upright through sheer will. I'm so tired, Marcus, she whispered against his shoulder. So tired of running, of being afraid, of pretending I'm strong enough to face this alone. You don't have to face anything alone anymore, he promised, his arms tightening around her. You're home now. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew their situation was more complicated than simple love and reunion. The world outside his ranch was still hostile to relationships like theirs, and Ayana's appearance would raise questions he wasn't sure either of them was ready to answer. The storm raged on through the night. For now, that was enough. They were together, they were safe. The rest of the world could wait until morning. Chapter 2. Ghosts of the Past. Marcus woke before dawn to find Ayana's side of the bed empty. For a moment, panic seized him. Had she left again? Disappeared back into the storm? But then he smelled coffee brewing and heard the soft sounds of someone moving carefully around his kitchen. He found her standing at the window, watching the snow continue to fall. She'd braided her hair and was wearing one of his old shirts over a pair of pants she'd somehow altered to fit her small frame. Couldn't sleep? He asked, joining her at the window. I keep expecting to wake up and find. This is all a dream, she admitted. That I'm still out there in the cold and my mind is playing tricks on me. Marcus placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric. It's real. You're here. You're safe. Shh. She leaned back against him, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the storm slowly exhaust itself against the mountains. Marcus, she said finally, what are we doing? It was the question he'd been avoiding since she'd appeared on his doorstep. The practical question. The one that demanded they face reality instead of losing themselves and the miracle of being together again. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I'm not letting you go again. And when the storm clears, when your ranch hands return from town, when people start asking questions about the Indian woman living in your house, Marcus turned her in his arms, studying the face he'd memorized during countless lonely nights. Let them ask. This is my land, my house. If they don't like my choices, they can find work elsewhere. It's not that simple, and you know it. Your business partners, the bank, the territorial government, they all have opinions about men who consort with Indian women. Consort?
Marcus's
jaw tightened. Is that what we're doing? Consorting? You know what I mean? I know what they'd call it. Also know I don't care what they call it. He cupped her face in his hands. 5 years ago, I let them tear us apart because I was young and stupid and thought I could protect you by letting you go. I won't make that mistake again. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning quiet. Marcus moved to the window and cursed under his breath. Who is it? Ayana asked, though her tone suggested she already knew this visit wouldn't be pleasant. Bill Henderson and Tom McCarthy, 2 of my business partners. Marcus's expression grew grim. They must have ridden through the night to get here so quickly. Someone in town must have seen you arrive. Ayana stepped back from the window, her face closing off into the carefully neutral mask Marcus remembered from when she'd dealt with hostile white settlers. I'll wait in the bedroom, she said quietly. No. Marcus caught her arm. Hide. Not anymore. This is your home now, and they'll treat you with respect, or they'll leave. The knock on the door was sharp and impatient. Marcus answered it to find 2 men stamping snow off their boots, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Marcus, Bill Henderson said without preamble, we need to talk. Bill, Tom, come in. Warm yourselves by the fire. As the 2 men entered, their eyes immediately found Ayana standing by the kitchen table. Their reaction was everything Marcus had feared: surprise, disapproval, and barely concealed disgust.
So it's true, Tom McCarthy said slowly. You've taken in a squaw.
The slur hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus felt Ayanna flinch beside him, saw the way she seemed to shrink into herself despite her efforts to remain proud. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "You'll speak respectfully in my home, or you'll leave immediately." "Marcus, be reasonable," Henderson said, attempting diplomacy. "You know, we have nothing against the woman personally, but you have to understand how this looks. How it looks to whom?" "To everyone. The bank, the territorial authorities, your other investors." "Christ, Marcus, half our cattle contracts are with the army. How do you think they'll react when they learn you're harboring a hostile Indian?" "Harboring?" Marcus's control finally snapped. "This woman is not some criminal I'm hiding. Her name is Ayanna. She's a member of the Crow Nation, and she's welcome in my home for as long as she chooses to stay." McCarthy stepped forward aggressively. "And what about your obligations to your partners?" "We've invested thousands in this ranch, Marcus. We won't sit by and watch you destroy everything we've built for some savage." The sound of Marcus's fist connecting with McCarthy's jaw echoed through the room like a gunshot. The man staggered backward, blood streaming from his split lip. "Get out," Marcus said quietly. "Get out of my house before I throw you out." Marcus Henderson tried again. "Please think about what you're doing. The woman can stay until the storm passes. We understand that. But after that, she stays as long as she wants to stay. Then we'll have no choice but to dissolve our partnership, withdraw our investments, call in our loans." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus knew they weren't bluffing. These men had the power to ruin him financially, to take everything he'd spent 20 years building. He also knew he didn't care. "Then do it," he said simply. "But understand that you'll be destroying one of the most profitable ranches in the territory over your own prejudices. I'll rebuild without you if I have to." Henderson and McCarthy exchanged glances, clearly not having expected such complete defiance. "You're making a mistake, Marcus," Henderson said finally. "A mistake that will cost you everything." After they left, Marcus found Ayanna sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry," she said without looking up. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never wanted to cost you your livelihood. You haven't cost me anything." They did, with their hatred and small minds. Be realistic. They're right about the contracts, the investments. You could lose the ranch over this. Marcus sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Ayanna, look at me." When she finally met his eyes, he saw the same fear and self-doubt that had driven her away 5 years earlier. "I lost everything that mattered when I let you go," he said quietly. "The ranch, the money, the business, none of it means anything. Without you, I'd rather be broke and happy than rich and empty. And if I leave, if I disappear again, let you rebuild your partnerships, then I'll follow you. I'll spend the rest of my life following you until you believe that you're worth more than any business deal or social expectation." For the first time since the confrontation, Ayanna smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real. "A stubborn man, Marcus Blackwood. The stubbornest. It's one of my better qualities." As they sat together in the kitchen, the storm finally beginning to clear outside, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Let his partners withdraw their money. Let the contracts be canceled. He'd built the Diamond B Ranch once. Could build it again, but this time he'd build it with the woman he loved by his side. ##. Chapter 3. Standing ground the next week brought a parade of visitors, each with their own version of advice, threats, or ultimatums. Word had spread quickly through the territory about Marcus Blackwood's Indian woman, and everyone from the bank president to the local preacher felt compelled to share their opinions. Ayanna bore it all with the dignified composure Marcus remembered, but he could see the toll it was taking. She ate little, slept less, and spent long hours staring out at the mountains as if contemplating escape. "They're wearing you down," Marcus said one evening as they sat before the fire. "All these people with their judgments and predictions of doom. Aren't they wearing you down too?" she asked. "Today alone we had the banker threatening foreclosure, the preacher warning about your immortal soul, and 3 of your ranch hands quitting because they won't work for a man who cavorts." With savages, Marcus reached for her hand, noting how thin her fingers had become. "Are you thinking of leaving?" The question hung between them, like a bridge neither was sure they dared cross. Ayanna was quiet for so long that Marcus began to fear her answer. "Every day," she said finally. "Every day I think about how much simpler your life would be if I just disappeared again. And every day I think about how meaningless my life would be without you." "Marcus, no. Let me finish." He turned to face her fully. 5 years ago, I let fear drive my decisions. It's fear of what people would say, fear of losing my business, it's fear of not being accepted by the very society that I realize now was never worth joining in the first place. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch he'd built with his own hands and sweat. "You know what I learned in the years you were gone? That success without love is just elaborate loneliness. That respect from people you don't respect is worthless. That all the money and property in the world can't fill the emptiness where your heart should be. But your ranch is just land and buildings. It only became a home when you walked back." Through that door, Marcus returned to his chair, taking both her hands in his. "Ayanna, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." She nodded, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "Marry me." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Ayanna's eyes widened with shock, hope, and terror in equal measure. "Marcus, you can't be serious. After everything that's happened this week, after seeing how people react to us, even living under the same roof, I'm completely serious. It's more serious than I've ever been about anything in my life. A marriage between us wouldn't be legal in the territory. The government doesn't recognize unions between whites and Indians, and we'll have our own ceremony. Your traditions and mine, witnessed by people who actually matter to us, instead of people who think they have the right to judge us." Ayanna pulled her hands free and stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. "You're talking about giving up everything your place in society, your business relationships, it's possibly even your legal claim to this land if the territorial authorities decide to make an example of you. I'm talking about gaining everything that actually matters. And what happens when you realize what you've sacrificed? When the isolation gets to you, when the financial pressures become too much, when you start resenting me for the choices you had to make." Marcus heard the fear beneath her questions, the deep insecurity that had been carved into her soul by years of rejection and hardship. "What happens," he said quietly, "when you finally believe that you're worth fighting for?" The question stopped her pacing. She turned to look at him, and he saw tears glittering in her eyes. "I've been cast out by my own people and rejected by yours," she whispered. "I've been called a curse, a shame, a burden to everyone who's ever cared about me. How can you ask me to believe I'm worth the loss of everything you've worked for?" Marcus crossed the room to her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Because you are worth it. Because you're worth more than all of it combined. Because the only thing I've ever truly worked for is the chance to love you completely, openly, without apology or compromise. Marcus, I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt by people who should have protected you, but I'm not them. Ayanna, I'm not Joseph, who married you out of duty. I'm not your father, who gave you away for political gain. Not the white settlers who see you as less than human." He pressed his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the space between them. "I'm the man who's loved you for 7 years, through separation and heartbreak and lonely nights that felt like they'd never end. I'm the man who would rather be poor with you than rich without you. I'm the man who's asking you to take a leap of faith with him, not because it's safe, but because some things are worth the risk." Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, years of pain and fear finally finding release. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Marcus, I'll marry you." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a journey that had lasted far too long. But even as they held each other in the firelight, both of them knew that saying yes was only the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead, and they would need all their strength and love to face them. Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time, it felt like a blessing rather than a barrier, nature's way of giving them a little more time to prepare for the battles to come. They planned the ceremony for the new moon, when darkness would provide cover for their guests, and the intimate nature of their union could unfold without curious eyes watching from town. Word had been sent carefully, quietly, to the few people whose presence would make the night complete. Ayanna spent the day in preparation rituals her grandmother had taught her, cleansing herself with sage smoke and sweet grass, braiding her hair with ribbons and shells that had belonged to generations of women in her family. The dress she wore was one she'd sewn herself from buckskin and blue wool, combining the traditions of both their peoples into something uniquely theirs. Marcus dressed in his finest suit, but added a leather vest decorated with beadwork that Ayanna had created during their week of waiting. At his throat he wore a silver pendant that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had married for love rather than convenience, and had taught Marcus that some principles were worth any sacrifice. As the sun set behind the mountains, their guests began to arrive. Tom Whitehorse, a Crow elder who had known Ayanna since childhood, came first, his weathered face grave with the solemnity of the occasion. Behind him came Mary and John Santos, Mexican settlers who ran a small ranch 20 miles south and had always treated both Marcus and Ayanna with respect and kindness. The biggest surprise was the arrival of Father Miguel from the mission in silver, Crick priest who had baptized both Crow and white children who saw God's love as something too vast to be contained by human prejudices. "Are you ready for this, my friend?" Tom Whitehorse asked Marcus as they stood waiting for the ceremony to begin. "I've been ready for 7 years," Marcus replied. The ceremony itself was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. But Tom Whitehorse spoke the ancient words of his people, calling upon the spirits of earth and sky to bless the union. Father Miguel offered prayers in Spanish and English, invoking divine protection for a love that transcended the boundaries society tried to impose, but it was the moment when Marcus and Ayanna spoke their own vows that transformed the gathering from mere ritual to something transcendent. "5 years ago, I let fear convince me that love wasn't enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Tonight, I promise you that love will be everything. My heart, my home, my future, all of it is yours, freely, given, never to be taken back." Ayanna's response came in both English and Crow, her words weaving together the languages of their separate worlds. "I have wandered in darkness, but you are my light. I have known hunger and cold, but you are my warmth and sustenance. I have been cast out and rejected, but you are my home. I choose you, Marcus Blackwood, in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, until the stars fall from the sky." When Tom Whitehorse bound their hands with leather cord decorated with eagle feathers, and Father Miguel spoke the words that made them husband and wife in the eyes of God, the small gathering erupted in celebration. Mary Santos had brought a feast of traditional Mexican dishes, while Tom Whitehorse contributed venison and wild rice prepared in the old way, but the real celebration was in the looks Marcus and Ayanna exchanged. The way their hands remained clasped throughout the evening, the quiet joy that radiated from them both as they accepted congratulations from people who truly understood what their union meant. "You know this won't be easy," Father Miguel said to Marcus as the evening wound down. "There will be people who will never accept what you've done tonight." "I know, Father." "But there will also be people who understand that love is the strongest force in creation. We'll focus on them instead." As their guests departed into the darkness, Marcus and Ayanna found themselves alone under a canopy of stars that seemed to shine more brightly than usual. "Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus said, savoring the sound of her new name. "Mrs. Blackwood," Ayanna repeated, testing how it felt on her tongue. "It has a nice sound to it." They made love that night with the tenderness of reunion and the passion of commitment. Two souls finally united without barriers or compromises. But even in their joy, both were aware that the real test of their marriage would begin with the sunrise. The town's reaction was swift and predictable. By noon the next day, A delegation had arrived at the Diamond B demanding that Marcus come to his senses and annul the union. When he politely but firmly declined, the threats escalated. "You're finished in this territory, Blackwood," declared James Morrison, the territorial judge. "No decent person will do business with you. Your credit will be cut off, your contracts canceled. You'll be lucky if they don't run you out on a rail." "Then I suppose I'll have to find indecent people to do business with," Marcus replied calmly. "They tend to be more honest anyway." But as the days passed and the economic pressure mounted, even Marcus began to wonder if love would indeed be enough. The bank called in his loans, his cattle contracts were canceled, and suppliers refused to sell him equipment or feed. First time since inheriting the ranch, Marcus faced the very real possibility of losing everything. It was Ayanna who suggested the solution that would save them both. "What if we don't need their approval?" she asked one evening as they reviewed their dwindling finances. "What if we create our own community, our own way of life?" "What do you mean?" "I mean people like Tom Whitehorse, like the Santos family, like Father Miguel, people who see past skin color to the human heart beneath. What if we built something for them instead of trying to force our way into a world that we'll never want?" Us. The idea was radical, dangerous, and completely appealing. Instead of fighting for acceptance from a society that would never grant it, it would create their own society, one based on respect, mutual aid, and the radical notion that love was stronger than prejudice. It wouldn't be easy. It would require them to be pioneers in every sense of the word, breaking new ground not just in agriculture and ranching, but in human relationships and social structures. But as Marcus looked at his wife, strong, intelligent, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with conventional standards, he knew they could do it. Together, they could build something better than what they were leaving behind. "Where do we start?" he asked. Ayanna smiled, the first truly joyful expression he'd seen on her face since their wedding night. "We start by inviting our friends to come home." Chapter 5. Building something new. 6 months after their wedding, the Diamond B Ranch had been transformed into something unprecedented in the American West. A community where white settlers, Mexican families, and Native Americans worked side by side as equals, bound together by mutual respect rather than government treaties or economic necessity. Tom Whitehorse had been the first to accept their invitation, bringing his extended family and their horse herd to graze on Marcus's vast pastures. The Santos family had followed, along with their expertise in cattle ranching and their connections to Mexican markets that remained open. When American buyers turned away, Father Miguel established a small mission chapel on the property, offering services in 3 languages and performing marriages that wouldn't have been recognized anywhere else in the territory. A schoolhouse followed, where children of all backgrounds learned reading, writing, and arithmetic alongside traditional skills like horsemanship, hunting, and the agricultural techniques each culture brought to the community. But it was Ayanna who truly made the experiment work. Her intelligence, education, and natural diplomacy made her the perfect bridge between different groups. She spoke 5 languages fluently, understood the cultural nuances that could make or break delicate negotiations, and had an innate sense of fairness that earned respect from everyone in the growing community. "You've become the mayor of our little town," Marcus told her one evening as they walked through the settlement that now housed over 200 people. "I prefer to think of myself as a translator," she replied. "Help people understand each other, find common ground." "And what about us? Have you found common ground between the Cherokee woman and the white rancher?" Ayanna stopped walking and turned to face her husband, her dark eyes soft with the love that had only grown stronger through months of challenge and change. "I found something better than common ground," she said. "I found home." Their success hadn't gone unnoticed by territorial authorities. The experiment at Diamond B was being watched carefully by people who saw it as either a dangerous precedent or a potential solution to the ongoing conflicts between settlers and native tribes. The test came when Colonel James Bradley arrived, with a small cavalry unit ostensibly to assess the security situation at the ranch. In reality, everyone knew he'd been sent to determine whether the mixed community represented a threat to white settlement in the region. Marcus and Ayanna met him at the main gate. flanked by Tom Whitehorse and John Santos's show of unity that wasn't lost on the military man. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Colonel Bradley said formally. I trust you're prepared to answer some questions about your unique arrangement here. We're happy to show you around, Colonel, Marcus replied. Nothing to hide. The tour that followed was a revelation for the military officer. He'd expected to find either a primitive commune barely surviving on the frontier or a potential fortress where hostile Indians might be planning attacks on white settlements. Instead, he found a thriving agricultural community with modern facilities, productive farms, and obvious prosperity. Children played together regardless of their racial background. Men and women worked side by side in fields and workshops. School was better equipped than most in established towns. And the medical facility Ayanna had established was treating patients from 50 miles around. How do you maintain order? Bradley asked, as they watched a group of mixed-race children practice reading under a teacher who was herself half Mexican, half Crow. The same way any community maintains order, Ayanna replied. We have rules, everyone. Agrees to follow, consequences for those who break them, and leaders people trust to make fair decisions. And if someone commits a serious crime, then they face a council of their peers, people from all backgrounds, who hear the evidence and decide on appropriate punishment or restitution. Colonel Bradley was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. With his preconceptions about racial mixing and frontier justice, Mrs. Blackwood, he said finally, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Are you happy here? Truly happy? Or are you simply making the best of a difficult situation? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications about whether she'd been coerced or manipulated into her current life. Colonel Ayanna said with quiet dignity, 6 months ago, I was a starving widow begging for shelter from a winter storm. Today, I'm the wife of a man who loves me, the leader of a community that respects me, and the mother of children who will grow up never knowing that their mixed heritage is supposed to be a source of shame. Mother. Marcus looked at her in surprise. Ayanna smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat belly. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. We're going to have a baby. The joy that transformed Marcus's face was visible to everyone present. He swept Ayanna into his arms, spinning her around, while tears of happiness streamed down both their faces. Colonel Bradley watched the display of genuine love and joy with something like wonder in his eyes. When Marcus finally set his wife down, the military man was smiling. I think I have all the information I need, he said quietly. This community poses no threat to territorial security. In fact, it may be the solution to problems we've been struggling with for decades. That evening, as the community celebrated the news of the coming baby with a feast and dancing that lasted well into the night, Marcus and Ayanna stole away too. Their favorite spot overlooking the valley they'd turned into paradise. Are you really happy? Marcus asked, echoing the colonel's question. Sometimes I wonder if you gave up too much to be with me. What did I give up? Life of poverty and prejudice? The chance to be someone's second-class citizen? The opportunity to raise children who would be rejected by both their cultures? She took his hand and placed it on her belly, where their child grew beneath her heart. This baby will grow up knowing that love conquered hatred, that courage overcame fear, that two people who were told they couldn't be together built something beautiful despite every obstacle. Marcus pulled her close, marveling once again at the strength and wisdom of the woman who'd transformed his life. What do you think our child will become? He asked, free. Ayanna said simply, completely beautifully free to be exactly who they're meant to be. As they sat together under the star-filled sky, surrounded by the sounds of celebration from their chosen family, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with desperation, a starving woman begging for shelter from a storm. It had nearly foundered on the rocks of prejudice and social pressure, but it had been saved by the most powerful force in creation, love that refused to accept limitations, refused to bow to convention, refused to believe that any barrier could be stronger than two hearts united in common purpose. Their son was born the following spring. During a week when the valley was carpeted with wildflowers and the air was sweet with the promise of new beginnings, they named him Freedom Freedom Blackwood. And he was welcomed into the world by a community that saw him not as a mixed-blood child caught between two worlds, but as the perfect synthesis of both. As Marcus held his son for the first time, with Ayanna recovering in the bed they'd built together and the home they'd created together, he thought about the woman who had appeared at his door that snowy night, desperate and broken, offering herself in exchange for basic human kindness. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, prouder,